I am here with Dr. Scott Smith, who is a philosophy professor at Biola University. Hi, Dr. Smith.
Hi, good to be with you.
Thanks so much. I want to talk with you about your pretty new book, Exposing the Roots of Constructivism. The first thing I want to do is just break down the title, the main title of your book, Exposing the Roots of Constructivism. What exactly is constructivism in this context?
Well, I'm working off a common idea, in the general public, that many people think, that we can't know things as they really are. Instead, we're really just working with our interpretations. And this is especially so in things like religion or ethics. Maybe it's beauty, but even truth. We hear a lot of people say, well, you got your truth, I've got mine, or, things like that. Um, Nonetheless, there still is a reality. I think we all just commonly know, that we're dealing with. Um, but if it's not that, we can really know reality, as it is, then it seems in some way we have to construct it, or in some way it's up to us what those things are. Usually people will bracket the sciences, at least the hard sciences, from this. And this plays off of an old idea called the fact value split, that science gives us the knowledge of the facts, but the other areas, seem to be like, especially religion and ethics, but these other things too, so commonly are thought to be up to us, that we get to construct. So things like that, is where I'm working off of, for constructivism.
When you say fact value split,
Mm-hmm.
is the value part the stuff we make up and the fact part is the objective stuff we don't make up?
More or less, yes. Where science is thought to be able to give us knowledge of how what the facts are of reality, but so often it's thought that these other things, maybe even meanings, of texts, things like that, are just thought to be values, opinions, preferences, our constructs, if you will, things like that.
So when someone says, "Oh, you've got your view, I've got mine," that makes me think of a word I know, subjectivism or relativism. Are those the same thing as constructivism?
Well, those can be species of it, or examples of constructivism. Um, Relativism would be one kind because it denies that there, at least moral relativism, it denies that there are any real universal morals true for all people, that objectively exist. Instead, in my accepting something as right for me makes it right for me. So that making word there, that's a constructivist, kind of term there.
So if we look at subjectivism and relativism as
Mhm.
kinds of constructivism or species of it,
Yeah,
where does nominalism fit in? Is nominalism a kind of constructivism?
it's a great question. I what I'm trying to show in that book is that nominalism is, to put it more formally, is sufficient for views to be constructivist, or it's enough, for that. Um, but there are other ways views could be constructivist. Now, I'm not trying to, spend time in that book to really explore what some of those are, but I've come across at least one. There could be more other kinds of views that are not nominalist per se, but nonetheless, I think nominalism is behind so many of these different kinds of constructivist views, like the ones that I just, kind of mentioned, these values sort of things.
Can you help me understand what exactly is the difference here between constructivism and nominalism?
Well, nominalism, as the way I'm looking at it in this book, is it's a kind of view about the nature of what's real. And it's trying to say that everything is um, it's saying everything is just particular. It's just one particular thing. Um, and everything is simple. It's just, metaphysically, in terms of what's real, it's just one thing. Um, So they're not like two or more things, combined, on this. Um, and it also means that these things are located in space and time. So there's no room for abstract, kind of objects, like Plato, kind of thought. So,
Forms.
yeah, exactly. So they're concrete, located space and time. And, with nominalism, it may be an example to say everything's particular. I was trying to think of some, maybe I used to work in the grocery business, and sometimes, in produce, and say that you got to, you go into the store and hear all these, a rack of, or a bunch of tomatoes, they're all ripe. So big red ones, here they are. And you look at them and say, wow, look at all those tomatoes. But on nominalism, it's not literally the case that there's something identical in common, between each of those. There's not literally in common, a color red, for example, or a round, shape, or however else we want to describe that shape, or some other quality, that makes the tomato a tomato, a tomato-ness, we might say, something like that. There's no literal quality that they all have in common. Everything is just particular. It's a particular tomato, but there's nothing real that they all literally share in common. So that's kind of the idea here with nominalism. Everything is particular and it's just one thing, not a combination of other things.
And your view is that that view is wrong?
I think it's mistaken. How it leads back to constructivism, maybe I should have said that too there. I think that based on what I try to show in the book, I think nominalism actually undermines itself. It's an interesting view, and I know lots of people, down through time have, held to that, but I don't think it can really sustain any real qualities, in reality. And if that's the case, we're kind of faced with a dilemma, because it seems like, hey, we live in a real world, I mean, even just practically speaking, you and I are really talking right now, for example, over the computer here. But if nominalism is true, then there can be no such real things. And if
It's
that's
all
what
appearances.
I guess, but maybe, even those things, appearances of what or for whom? Because I don't think there would even be any knowers, on this kind of view, if we really push it for consistency. But nonetheless, at least at a practical level, hey, we live our daily lives. So if there's no such reality to these things, somehow we have to construct them, maybe by our ways of talking about them, the ways we conceive of them, things like that. And I think that's a key way that they're related here.
What's this dilemma? Is it that either nominalism is true or we have no knowledge? Are those our two options?
If
What's the
nominalism,
dilemma?
well, if nominalism is true, I think we're faced, if we, and I'm trying to push it for consistency in the book, and that if it's really true, then I think it undermines the reality of anything. There's nothing real left. So there's nothing left for us to know. So there's no ability for us to have any knowledge, because there's nothing there to know. and we're not here even to know. But that just seems, patently false, to me. So something else has to be true. And there's several things we simply do know, it seems, some basic, sort of things. I could be mistaken, but I have every reason to believe you and I are really talking, right now, over Zoom. And I know that, it's possible I'm mistaken, but why should I believe that?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that if we really accept nominalism, it leads to some very dire conclusions, ones that are unsustainable.
And so you want us to reject nominalism and instead accept a realist view of properties. That's the way I understand your book, is you're trying to move academics towards realism rather than nominalism. Is that accurate?
That's right. Yes.
What does that mean? Can you describe what you would have us do, us academics? What would a realist view of properties mean?
Well, for one, excuse me, it means that they qualities, like colors and maybe even thoughts, that people have, in their minds, properties of minds, for example, or properties of physical things. Those things really exist. And more than that, they are what goes along with this realist view is that they're what's called universals. They are one thing, like red is a color, but it can have many instances, like those many red tomatoes, in the grocery store. Or you and I are having a conversation right now about realism, let's say. So that, and as listeners, try to, follow here too, they could have the same thought, before their minds, too. So that there is a concept of, of what we're talking about that the listeners could have in mind, that you can have in mind, that I can have in mind, and at least the essence of those, I think, the core of those things is identical. It's something that can be literally shared. So realism posits that there are these universals. They're real. They're not just our concepts, about things. And they can be present in many, instances or many minds, as the case may be, at the same time. And they really exist. They're not just our constructs. They exist independently of us.
So you're arguing that there's mind independent properties,
Mhm.
and because there is, academics need a realist view of properties.
And they're not just mind independent. These things, when I know there've been different disputes about this, but let me go ahead and lead, with the color red. I know some people have tried to reduce it to nothing but, wavelengths, but I think there's something more to it, than simply that. Maybe that's part of the causal story about how we know what red looks like, what it is like. But I think this idea that things are universals, the universal quality itself, or even let's say the meaning, the content of what we're talking about, the content of a thought, that is something on this kind of view is something immaterial, in itself. And then it can be present in different minds or different tomatoes or whatever may be. But so there's something there that is real, and it is fundamentally immaterial. And there is even more so an essence to it, something that defines it as the kind of thing, that it is versus something else. And this is a quality that's intrinsic, to these things. It's not something I ascribe or, give to the color red, supposedly. It exists independently of that.
So you're talking about metaphysics,
Yeah.
ontology, stuff
Yeah.
that exists. And you're saying that there are things that are mind independent, but more than that, inherent in the stuff itself,
I think
particular.
so. Mm-hmm.
But you want to put everything that exists in time and space. So what does that mean that it's in time and space, but also immaterial?
Well, I don't. I think the universal qualities I'm talking about themselves are not spatially located
Oh, okay.
themselves, but when they're instanced, in like your mind or my mind or whatever, or in the tomatoes, then they are instants.
Oh,
they do have a location there. I forget exactly how I put this, but I know J.P. Moreland talks about it as a universal is modified in the sense of it becomes a mode of its existence when it's present in like a mind or a tomato or whatever.
okay. Is it all nominalism that you think is misguided? Or are there kinds of nominalisms that are better than others? For example, you in your book discuss trope nominalism.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe that and place it?
Well, I wish I had a good answer for you to say, why on earth did it ever get called trope nominalism? Because it's not some special non-literal meaning, given to something to create some, special image. Maybe only in the sense of it's a word given to help us think about something. I don't know, but I just simply, come back to it. It's a view that says, okay, yes, it's nominal, meaning that everything is particular. So there are a particular red shade in that tomato and a particular red shade in that tomato. And there's red 1, red 2, red 3, and all that. The thing about the trope view is that it holds that those properties are real. They're really there. There's really such a thing as red 1 or red 2. It's not just a way of talking. And maybe that's a helpful way too for some people. Sometimes it is for me. I'm just trying to explain it in classes. Sometimes it's helpful just to step back and think of nominalism in the more general sense of in name only. So meaning in here, it's not that there's literally this universal or identical quality of red in each of these tomatoes. It's just that's just a name only. But the trope view says, yeah, those qualities like red or the meaning of that thought, all those things are particular, but they're real.
Does that mean you dislike trope nominalism less than nominalism in general?
Well, I it's pretty darn hard for me, at least, to get my mind around, saying that, well, red isn't real, there aren't any real red things, out there. And it seems like those are qualities of things. So at least for me, that's easier to relate to.
Okay.
But I do think it runs into, very similar problems as the other views of nominalism do too.
So after you published this book, is there anything you thought, shoot, I should have added it to the book? Is there anything you wish you put in there that you didn't?
Well, that's a good question. That's a real good question.
Well, then we're looking forward to the updated second edition, perhaps.
Well, actually, maybe there's one thing that is coming to mind, and it's a distinction I came across more recently since the publication, was the idea that, in nominalism, it says everything is simple. It's just one thing. And again, it's a particular red shade, like we said, for the trope view. The view that I call austere nominalism would say, well, there are no red properties, but there are red objects. But really, like the tomato, it might call it a red and round and ripe, tomato. But all those things are hyphenated. If we've spelled it out in, type, written form, indicating that it's just one thing. And it's not like those individual qualities are real, on that kind of view. Well, I'm saying all that because on both those kinds of nominalism, they are simple in the sense of they're just one thing, metaphysically or ontologically. On the other hand, there's another distinction, saying something's mariologically, simple, no separable parts. And because of some of the work I've been doing in philosophy of religion, with nominalism, it ends up becoming important then, to apply that like to God, to say, okay, God is simple in one sense, I think, mariologically, no separable parts. But that doesn't mean that God doesn't have, many attributes. I would say as real qualities. Yeah, like justice or loving kindness, mercy, things like that. So I think that might be one thing I might add, and perhaps in the chapter where I deal with some things about philosophy of religion. So yeah, it was a good question.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Scott Smith. I appreciate your time.